A Sala de Guerra, Sala de Cinema Production. Versão brasileira, Julio César Guedes, today's episode.
To find out everything about the history, creation, and use of atomic bombs in World War II, read my book O Atomo Como Arma, which is available on Amazon and also at the We Club store. If you want to buy this copy here, autographed by me for you, just send an email to saladeguerra.com with your zip code so I can calculate the shipping. A lot of people have already asked me to review this anime, which I know you might not even know, but it's extremely famous. And it's already over 10 years old. Much longer than that, it was released and was a huge success. And to make this review here, I watched it all over again, man. And it was such a rewarding experience. I'm really excited to do this review here for you guys. So today we're going to talk about Girls on Panzer, an anime that is a Japanese cartoon from 2012. It was released and it has an interesting story, right? Because it's one of the few creations in Japan that become anime that weren't originally manga, right? It's an original idea that already became an anime and even generated manga later on, right? Of sequential stories or even prequels. But it's an original idea. And man, basically it's about a group of schoolgirls who practice a sport called Senshado. Senshado means the way of the tank, right? Just like there are other sports, other martial arts like Aikido, right? They all have the same root, right? The term is very similar. Here, Senshado is basically a female martial art that is practiced with armored vehicles, with tanks. Does it sound crazy? It does. And it's extremely crazy, but it's also something that turned out to be extremely beautiful for the reasons I'm going to explain to you. The main character of this anime is Miho Nishizumi. She is a young girl who comes from a traditional family of Senshado practitioners. It's interesting how the anime uses a thoroughly Japanese aesthetic, right? All that classic Japanese aesthetic is used to introduce Senshado as something already traditional, right? For example, in Miho's house, her mother has a panel, and on that panel you can see a Mark I tank. But it's that same visual language from those Japanese drawings from past centuries, right? That depict things, scenes from the 18th and 19th centuries. And incredibly, there's a Mark I tank there. The British one, right? The first tank in history. But what does Miho do right in the first episode? She's looking for a new school. She wants to restart her life because she just left her school due to a trauma she suffered while practicing Senshado. Throughout the show, you'll find out more details about this episode, that she was the commander of one of the school's tanks and she decides to abandon the battle to save her teammates, and the tank's sliding down a cliff into the sea below. So she leaves the match to save her teammates. This causes her school to lose that match and others that followed, right? Because of a loss of morale. So she kind of tries to isolate herself from the reality of Senshado and finds a school called Oarai Academy. Another very interesting aspect of this anime is that these academies, they're built on huge aircraft carriers. And when I say huge, I mean really massive. Even today's Ford-class aircraft carriers are still small compared to these aircraft carriers in the anime, right? So they're basically floating cities. And we'll notice how each aircraft carrier from each academy has features that remind us of the countries those academies originate from in our real world. So the Oarai Academy is an academy that, for a long time now, hasn't practiced Senshado anymore. And that's exactly the reason why Miho chooses that school. It turns out that, unfortunately for her, just as she arrives at Oarai Academy, the Japanese government announces that it will host the Senshato World Championship that year. And because of that, the government asks all the academies to prepare their teams so they can participate in the Senshato World Championship. And then the school directors, the administration, the school leaders, find out by looking at the records that Miho is the only student at the school who has previous experience with Senshato. So they kind of force her to return to the sport. And at first she's really forced because she has no desire to do it at all, but she's compelled by the school administration to do it. And only after that, only after she makes some friends, does she start to feel more and more comfortable returning to Senshato. So it's interesting how she makes these friends, right, who are 4 other girls, each with a different personality. You have Sayori, who is very feminine, likes to talk a lot about relationships, and also talks a lot, is really into technology, likes cell phones a lot, and is always sending messages. There's Yukari, who's a tank nerd. This is the most interesting character, in my opinion, my favorite, Yukari, because she's the tank nerd. She's always sharing tank trivia all the time. And it's trivia from our world, man, not from their world. It's trivia from our world. So you'll see Yukari talking about generals from World War II, about tank tactics, about specific details of each vehicle. And she gets extremely, genuinely happy, really happy when she sees a new tank that she only knew from books, right? There's also Hana, who's a very sweet girl, who ends up becoming the tank's gunner, right, with extremely precise aim. And finally, Meiko, who's a little girl that, as the story explains, has low blood pressure. She's kind of narcoleptic, always sleeping all the time. But she's extremely smart, so she learns how to drive the vehicles, right, to drive the tanks, and she becomes an extremely skilled driver. She does things that I won't even describe. I'll let you see for yourselves so I don't spoil the surprise. But anyway, they look for the tanks in the facilities of the floating city, Oarai, and end up finding 5 tanks. What kind of tanks are these? A Panzer 38T and M3, Lee, a Type 89, the Japanese one, a Stu G3, and also a short-barreled Panzer IV from the early series. And it's precisely the Panzer IV that will become the main vehicle of this series, because it's the vehicle that will be crewed by Miho. Her friends, right? The 5 of them will become the crew of the Panzer IV, right? And I dare say that you'll never find anywhere such beautiful representations of tanks as in this show here, okay? As in Girls and Panzer, man. Why? Because there's no point in trying to see it in movies, because you'll always see more of the same, right? You'll see some Shermans, you'll see T-34s, because there are still plenty of those vehicles around with examples still running and operational, but rarer vehicles. You can't expect to see that in a movie unless they use computer graphics, and then computer graphics, we know it's hard to believe, right? It often looks a lot like a video game when they try to recreate a vehicle like that with computer graphics. But in animation, man, amazingly, that kind of reaction doesn't happen, and you get to see what looks like the real vehicle right there. You'll remember that many of these vehicles, for example, tanks like the Panzer 38T, the Type 89, there are very few of these vehicles running, if any at all, you know? So seeing these vehicles in action with all that detail, including the animation sound design, feels incredibly realistic. You know, you're not going to find that anywhere else, right? I think Girls and Panzer is the only animation where you'll have the chance to see these vehicles running like that. Also, because Girls and Panzer presents the vehicles without any kind of prejudice regarding their origin. Man, there's no prejudice about where they come from. What do I mean by that? You know very well that if you were watching a cartoon or a movie, whatever it is, about tanks produced here in the West, in the United States, in England, in Europe. Of course, the protagonist would be a Sherman, right? Of course, the protagonist would have to be a Sherman, but no, the protagonist. Here it's a Panzer IV, and there's no connection between the Panzer IV and vilification, right? There's no direct association of that vehicle with the Third Reich. It's just that vehicle, and it's the one that's going to be the protagonist of the story, you know? The Shermans are shown in an extremely beautiful way, many of them rolling across the field. These are animation scenes that combine 2D with 3D, and they're really gorgeous, breathtaking even. So, you have Shermans, the production is extremely careful, the 75 mm gun Shermans, the gun Shermans, the high-velocity 76 mm ones, the EZ-8, you have the Sherman Firefly. And the production makes sure to remind you all the time, what's the difference between that vehicle and the other vehicle? And man, it's a delight to listen to the explanations that Yukari and the other characters give about the different details that identify each version of those tanks. It's amazing. The same goes for the T-34s, the same for the British tanks, the Matilda and the Churchill that are shown. It's a delight. Actually, that's the word for it, man. It's a kind of delight. All of that was created through the work of a guy named Takaaki Suzuki. This guy is a writer. He's a script writer in Japan, but he's also an amateur military historian. He's a guy who's an enthusiast of military history. Extremely dedicated to what he does, and he has an extensive resume as a consultant on military-themed anime. So, when you see an anime that has something related to aviation or tanks or soldiers or ships, anything like that, man, you can be sure that this guy is involved. Takaaki Suzuki is involved. And he's a total perfectionist in what he sets out to do, you know? You'll see in the show, for those who haven't watched Girls on Panzer yet, I'm sure if you give it a try, you won't regret it, man. Because it's the perfect show for guys who are tank enthusiasts like us, right? If you're watching this video, I assume you are too. Well, the show's script is full of references to the military history of tanks, right? Especially from World War II. For example, there's a moment when the Pravda team, you know, the Pravda school, surrounds the Oarai team, and they bring someone with a little flag to demand Oarai's surrender, right? And then one of the members of the Oarai team responds to her, nuts, right? Nuts, like, are you crazy? That's the answer that General McAuliffe, right, gave to the Germans when they, you know, demanded the surrender of the 101st American Division there in Bastonia. And man, it's exactly the whole winter setting, you know, the cold, the battle against the Pravda team. And in the end, you know, in the final battle, you see that team that's inspired by the Wehrmacht, right? With the Tigers, Panthers, Jagd Panthers, Jagd Tigers, and they surprise the Oarai team. Crossing a forest, man, taking a shortcut through a forest, in a very clear reference to Operation Yellow, you know, to Manstein's plan to move the tanks through the Ardennes. And the animation makes you remember that instantly. It's really, really satisfying, isn't it? And then you have the physics of the tanks themselves in the animation, which is just perfect. You know, you notice when they're moving, that slight movement, right? That the suspension causes in the tanks, and that the suspension absorbs when they hit objects on the ground. When the tanks break, when the tanks jump out of a hole, man, there's a moment when the IS-2 jumps out of a ditch, and it lands on the ground, spinning its turret. Man, that's gold. That's gold. For those who don't like tanks, I don't know, you probably won't even understand what I'm saying, but for those who do, man, the movement of the vehicles on the screen is just perfect, you know? And then you have the female characters, right, who are the protagonists. And I know you might be thinking, I'm not going to watch a cartoon about little girls, right? I'm not going to watch a Japanese cartoon with those high-pitched little girl voices. Man, that's just a detail. It's just a detail in a visual spectacle, and really an audiovisual one too, especially in terms of sound, because the sound design, which I've already mentioned, is amazing. And the girls don't get in the way of the show, you know? That part, that emotional core where they have to deal with things that aren't related to the tanks, is really small, and you don't feel like it, you know, hurts the animation in any way. On the contrary, as the animation goes on, you become more and more of a fan. You get more and more attached to those characters. It's really enjoyable to follow, isn't it? So, personally, man, like I told you, Yukari, right, who's my favorite, the tank nerd, she reacts in such an excited way, you know? In the opening scene of the first episode, she talks to Miho while looking through binoculars. The British tanks, right, from Santa Gloriana School, making a curved movement in sync, right? The Matilda IIs with the Churchill in the center. She says, my God, how beautiful it is to see these vehicles moving in sync. I never expected to see this in my life. So it's really cool. The action in the animation's really crazy, you know? It's really crazy. There are tanks jumping, there are tanks spinning, you know, there are things that, you know, wouldn't really happen like that in real life. But all of that is paired with physics that's extremely, extremely grounded in reality, right? In other words, the vehicles are faster. Some of them are much faster than they were in reality, right? Because you remember that the Tigers, the King Tigers, right, are slow vehicles. They didn't have a very high top speed. Here, they go pretty fast. When they're in action and the team commander orders, you know, a coordinated shot at a single target, you get amazed. You start drooling over what you're seeing on the screen because you're sure you won't see it in a movie, you won't see it in a documentary, in any other way except here. And all of that is just the cake. The cherry on top is the tactical side of it. The tactics used by Miho and the other team leaders to bring the battle to a favorable outcome, right? Man, it's beautiful because you're not just watching these little girls killing each other, right? Actually, they don't kill each other. I'll explain that in a bit. But they're not just shooting at each other. There's a level of intelligence, maneuvering, knowledge of the terrain, the weather, the vehicles themselves, and the limitations of their own vehicles that's really beautiful to see in this show, right? So the final battle, man, the final battle there against Kuromori School, which is Miho's original school, and today is her sister's school, right? So there's even this duel between two sisters, which will only be resolved in the last episode. It's a demonstration of tactical brilliance that I've never seen anywhere else, no matter how crazy it is. Like I told you, the scene, for example, of the battle against the mouse. How does Miho manage to land a fatal shot on the most vulnerable area of the mouse, right? Which is the radiators, right behind the turret. How does she manage to get the mouse to stop in a spot so she can take a point-blank shot there and disable the mouse? It's amazing, man. It's really amazing, isn't it? And the whole way this tank combat system works is also very interesting. Because in the show, they say that those tanks over there, the ones approved for combat, are tanks that have to have been operated or tested before August 15, 1945, that is, before the day of Japan's surrender in World War II. And that the ammunition used in the championships in the battles is a special ammunition produced by the World League, so it's a different kind of ammunition, right? You can't, in fact, manufacture ammunition or modify ammunition in any way. It's punishable with severe penalties. And the inside of the tanks has a chemical and metallurgical treatment that completely protects the participants, right? The crew inside from the impact of the projectiles outside. So that's what makes tankery a safe sport in the world of Girls on Panzer. It's all complemented by an electronic monitoring and tracking system, which allows everyone to know exactly what's happening in each vehicle all the time. So, Girls on Panzer is a great ode to tanks. It's a big love poem to tanks made by those who love tanks for those who love tanks. So there's no better way to describe this show, right? It's a show that makes kids and young people who've never opened a military history book in their lives start getting interested in armored vehicles. Because at first, a tank is just a tank to you. There aren't any different models. It's only through studying, it's only with that enthusiasm that you start to notice the differences between each vehicle, and that's what this show manages to do. Through the character's enthusiasm for each of those vehicles, you start to get enthusiastic about each of those vehicles too. And Girls on Panzer can very well become a gateway to deeper research, right? For example, you might look for a book, watch a documentary, or find a channel here like Sala de Guerra. Maybe some of you watching this video today started to like this topic because of Girls on Panzer. By the way, I'd like you to say in the comments if that's the case for you, right? And it's an anime that was extremely successful, not only in Japan, but all over the world, especially in the West, where it was very well received. Why? Because the vehicles, for the reason I already mentioned to you, are very well represented in the animation, right? And this animation did for the city of Oarai, there in Japan, just north of Tokyo. It transformed the city, really changed it completely. Oarai became a major hub for anime tourism, not just for Japanese people, but for people from all over the world. Why? Because the animators literally took scenes from the city and put them in the animation. They drew several scenes from the city to perfection, including the original colors of the shops and buildings, and put them in the animation. So this created a pilgrimage route through the city for people to see what the animation shows. The city hall itself also fully embraced the project. They hold annual Girls on Panzer festivals there, and they also place replica tanks throughout the city. And they also paint, subway cars and regional trains that pass through the city with the anime theme. So the anime Girls on Panzer was largely responsible for the financial recovery of the city of Oarai, which was severely affected by the 2011 tsunami in Japan. So because of everything I just told you, because it's truly a demonstration of love for the history of tanks, because it's really a gateway that sparks passion in children and young people for the history of vehicles, armored vehicles. Girls on Panzer deserves a glorious salute of 5 cannons. Now tell me, have you watched Girls on Panzer? If you haven't, are you excited to watch it now? Tell us here in the comments. If you like this video, then share it with your friends, but also give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the Sala de Guerra so you don't miss anything else. I'll wrap up here. Thank you again for watching, and here's a big hug from the Sala de Guerra. Bye-bye.